Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Living Beyond the Splinter. My name is Angela Gibson with Eve Speaks or Angie Speaks. And today we're going to be talking about the basics of investing. And we have with us today our esteemed guest, Denny Mendez, who has been on Wall Street helping uh, stars with their financial lives for nearly 20 years. And so today he has all the knowledge and the nuggets that we're going to need to get us fit and ready post COVID. Um, Certainly, we've all been going through a very difficult time with COVID. But in this episode of Living Beyond the Splinter, we're going to talk about how to make our money work hard for us. And so, Danny, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And we're going to dive into the conversation shortly. I just want to make sure everybody can see, can hear, and there are no technical issues. So just give us a few moments. By the way, should you have any questions today regarding the basics of investing, be sure to drop it in the chat. We'll try our best to answer your questions in real time. And if not, you can also reach out to us in the group. So once again, welcome. I'm glad to have you here, whether you're live or you'll be joining or listening on the replay. I hope the information we provide today will be very helpful. So Danny, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself and about your background and why they should listen to you today, besides what I've already told them.
I guess I should have been prepared for this. So my name is Denny Mendez. I've been a financial planner close to 20 years. I cannot believe that every time I say it. I actually started my career on Wall Street. I started as a trader in the Bank of New York. So they had a realtor division. And around, I would say 2005, I left that side of the business to become a planner, meaning to meet with the actual public, because I was going crazy just being in front of screens, looking at numbers all day. I love numbers and I do find a lot of comfort in them, but I actually like sharing the knowledge with the community. So this is when I left being a trader to come and actually deal with the public and teach them the knowledge and show them how to invest and, give them the advice. So I've been doing this for the last, I was about to say 15 years, but I forget we're in 2021. So 16 years dealing with the public. So I've been doing this a long time.
Years. Yeah, that is a long time. So you're here to share the goodies with us. And for that, we are truly grateful. And so tell me, before I jump into the meat of the matter, tell me what is your perception of the marketplace as it pertains to investing or investments for the layman that does not have a clue? Like, what would you say to this person who's brand new and is clueless?
Very, very good question. So what would I tell someone that's brand new, has no idea anything about the stock market? So I'll tell you an example that I actually use, right? So I do a lot of work with professional baseball players, and a lot of these baseball players come from other countries. We're not talking about the guys that are Americans. We're talking about guys that come from the Dominican Republic, Cuba, Venezuela. And not only are these people that don't understand the language, these are people that don't even have stock markets where they come from.
Wow.
A stock market is something they just heard of on TV. It doesn't
really
exist.
Green.
The greenest you can possibly think. So when I tell them out, I try to explain to them the very, very basics as what stocks are, right? I'm like, hey, listen, have you guys ever been to McDonald's? They're like, of course, I've been to McDonald's. There's McDonald's all over the world. They're like, okay, McDonald's is a company and they issue shares to the public that you can invest in their company. Do you guys drink Starbucks? Do you guys drink Dunkin' Donuts? And I look at their outfits. Are you guys wearing Nikes? Are you guys wearing whatever they're wearing? I'm like, these companies here, they actually issue stock and you can invest in that company. So like, instead of buying yourself this Apple phone that you have, buy the Apple phone, but at the same time, invest a little bit in the company and try to make yourself some money. So I start with that conversation. And then they're like, what do you mean I can invest in this phone? And then that's how the conversation begins. Then, we start talking about stock markets and stock market basics. But I start there. I'm like, just invest in what you consume.
As you go on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you start there. You basically get them to even get a concept of what it takes to invest.
Correct.
The idea. Okay.
That's it.
And so how have you been doing post-COVID with the marketplace? Is it safe for people to start to invest right now? What would you recommend? I mean, it's scary out here.
Yeah, well, of course. Listen, it is scary, right? So it's scary, and it all depends on who you ask, right? So if you were a technology company like a Facebook or a Google, you actually did very well during COVID. So you actually did not do poor. You did very well. If you were an early Zoom investor, right now we're on a Zoom. A lot of people
Uh-huh.
didn't even know what Zoom was until COVID began, shut down business, and then everybody's like, now Zoom is like a verb. Hey, well, let's have a Zoom. People
Yeah.
understand what that means.
I'm all
So
zoomed out personally. I'm tired of this. But
almost
okay.
everybody is, right? But before it was like, hey, let's FaceTime each other. Let's FaceTime. And I use WhatsApp all the time. And it's like, all right, let's WhatsApp each other because
Uh-huh.
it's a video thing. But now it's a Zoom. Like, hey, let's have another Zoom. Like you said, I'm zoomed out myself. But Zoom is also a company you could have invested in. And it was like $50 a year ago, and now it's at $300.
Oh
So
wow.
but that's where we begin. Now, as far as where do I think the economy is gonna go? Do I think that the economy is going to completely shut down? I mean, like last year was the worst time. Like we literally shut down. Like you guys
Mm,
cannot even go into the office. Like if you work at Wells Fargo Mortgage, they're like, go home. You're not coming in ever. And did the economy stop? I would say it slowed down. I would say restaurants were really hurt. If you were anywhere that you had to actually physically go into a store, I would say they were really struggling. But the
mm-hmm.
economy didn't shut down. Like McDonald's was still working. Anything that had to do with technology was doing absolutely amazing. And everybody that went home, right now you're sitting in your house. People were forced to go home, and then guess what happened? Since they're forced to be home, they're like, I'm gonna fix up my house. I'm gonna fix up a space, and I gotta turn this into a work from home environment because that's what we became.
So let me
So
stop you for
one,
a second here. You said something very key that I think you glided over. You said before the stock Zoom stock was $50 and now it's 300. What does that mean to the person who's listening? What does that
okay.
mean?
So
Uh-huh.
so Zoom is a company, and the company what they're doing is they're providing a service. The service is this platform that you and I are using, right? You're out
Uh-huh.
in Staten Island, and I'm up here in Westchester, but it's like we're basically in the same room. We're having a conversation. So
Yes.
right now, that's the platform that Zoom was able to provide. Now, when it was only $50 or $40, I think it was even less. It was a company that they were like, "Hey, we have this service," but this is before COVID. I mean, their service is
Uh-huh.
going on for a while. Then when COVID came in and said, "Hey, everybody has to go home," guess what? When people went home, it wasn't a gradual thing. It was like abrupt. It was like from one day to the next,
Mm-hmm.
they were like, you guys gotta go home." So Zoom came in and they were like, "Hey, by the way, guys, we have this platform. You guys still have to communicate. You're in California, you're in New York, and you're in Florida. This platform will be able to help you. All you got to do is get on
Great.
it." And it's smart. They
Mm-hmm.
did it on a free service, and then they came out with their pricing models. And guess what? Like they became intelligent, and then they were like, "Hey, we're gonna bring this service to all the corporations or other schools, anybody in the government that actually needs to still communicate. They might not be together, but they still need to communicate. Versus a conference
Right.
line, people want to see each other." So Zoom became very profitable, and then guess what
Mm-hmm.
happened? Their bottom line just shot up. So they're
So for the person
the
who owns Zoom stock,
yep.
how from the $50 to the 300, how are they doing right now?
They're doing well. You know what? Let's take a look to see what Zoom is doing right now. Well, think about it. If you invested $50 and it went up to $300, you quadruple, you multiplied your money by six. It's $336 right now. So you
Mm.
multiplied your money by six. That basically means if you put in $100, you have $600 right now. That you're talking about in 1 year, right? And then you forget about the dollar. I almost never talk about the dollar amount, but just think about those percentages. Like if you put in $1,000 a
Uh-huh.
year ago, now it's $6,000 in 1 year.
Hmm.
Can you get in the bank? Probably not.
No. Wow. That's powerful. That's a powerful analysis right there. You
Yeah.
put in $1,000.
Now, don't get me wrong. Not every company is doing this well, but these technology companies they did okay.
Okay. So how do you get started? You're a new person, and how exactly do you get started? You want to
Okay.
learn to invest. You've been hearing about it. You hear about stocks. You hear about mutual funds. You hear about all these things, and some of it can sound like gibberish because you don't know what it means. So
Okay.
how does a new person get started? Because this is the basics of investing that we're talking about.
Okay. So now that's a good question, right? So let's say,
Uh-huh.
how do we get started? Like, man, I love, okay, you sat down, you explained to me that I can invest in McDonald's, you explained to me I can invest, on my phone. You told me about all these things. How do I do it? So now you have to understand the difference between stocks and actual like mutual funds, right? I like to use mutual funds as an example, or ETFs. ETFs is just an exchange traded fund, but it's very similar. So
Uh-huh.
now let's say you were like, hey, you know what? I love Amazon because I buy stuff from Amazon every other day, and I love Apple. Right? I'm just using those two as an example, right? If you wanted to buy one share of Amazon, it's like $3,000. If you wanted to
Wow.
buy one, yeah, it's not cheap. If you wanted to buy one share of Apple, it's like $100, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
means to buy just one share of Amazon and one share of Apple, you need like $3,500 to invest, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody has so much, disposable cash to invest. So I always tell them, why don't you guys invest in index funds, right? And I'm going to explain to you exactly what that is, right? So now what an index fund is that is basically, think of it like, hey, I want to invest in a specific industry or specific stocks. I might not have $10,000 to buy so many, one share of so many different stocks, but I might have $100 or $300. So now this is kind of like what mutual funds does. Mutual funds, think of them like a basket of stocks. And what this
Mutual
basket of
funds
stocks,
are a basket of stocks. Okay.
correct,
So it's like
correct.
having a basket with potatoes and oranges and grapefruit as as a visual.
You
Yes?
know what? You gave the perfect analogy, right? So let's say we're in
Okay.
a supermarket, right? I go
Uh-huh.
I go food shopping all the time. I did it today. So when you go into the fruit section, you're like, I want apples, I want oranges, I want bananas. I need to get some vegetables. I need to get a little bit of everything to put into this bag,
Okay.
right? So mutual funds and index funds, that's exactly what they're doing. What they're doing
Mm-hmm.
is they're like, hey, I'm very interested in, like, say, the technology industry. I'm just using that as an example. I'm very interested in
Mm-hmm.
the technology industry. So what the index funds does is like, you know what? I'm gonna get the best technology stocks. I'm gonna get a little bit of Apple. I'm gonna get a little bit of Facebook. I'm gonna get a little bit of Amazon. I'm gonna get a little bit of
Okay.
everything, and I'm gonna put it
Mm-hmm.
inside this shopping bag, if you will. That
Right.
shopping bag is what you can invest in. You can invest
Mm-hmm.
exactly what's inside that shopping bag. So you don't need thousands of dollars to own all these different companies. You can literally invest in all these companies with like $200. So
Wow.
the reason we do that, that's the reason they came out with mutual funds and the reason they came out with these index funds, because not everybody has so much cash to buy one share of all these stocks. But people can invest a little bit and they want to own everything.
So
So
mutual funds and index funds, what is the key differentiator between the two? Like explain that part again,
not a
please.
problem, not a problem, right? So mutual funds are becoming a little outdated, and I'm going to explain to
Okay.
you why. So mutual funds, this I'm going to give you a little bit of history lessons. Very
Mm-hmm.
popular in the 80s, very popular in the 90s. They started dying down a little bit in the early 2000s. The way mutual funds were priced before is that you had, like, say, the same example, right? You have the shopping bag of all these different stocks inside this bag.
Mm-hmm.
But now, like, say you call me up and you're like, you know what, I own this, but I want to sell it. But before, if you were in a mutual fund, you didn't know what that price was until the day was over, until the stock market closed and they repriced everything. So you had no idea what price you were getting when you're selling these
Right.
mutual funds. Not a lot of people were happy with that. They're like, I want to sell
Mm-hmm.
it in the morning. The morning the stock market is high, but I'm telling you, sorry, Angela, you got to wait till the stock market closes. And you have no idea what's going to happen that day. That day, bad news can come out and the market can tank. So,
And you can lose your
though,
money.
yeah, exactly. You can have a much lower price. So they came out with these, they call them ETFs. ETFs trade very similar to stocks. They're just like mutual funds, except that
Uh-huh.
you can sell it and buy it basically all day long. If you want to sell it at 10 in the
In real
morning,
time. Is that what you
real
mean?
time. You're selling it in real time.
Is that why
So
it's called an index fund as well?
no, index funds is basically you're investing in specific indexes. Technology
Mm.
index, materials
I see. Is that
index.
the category?
It's a category, correct. It's a
Okay,
category
got
of
it.
investing. So
Mm-hmm.
the two real differences are mutual funds and ETFs. ETFs stand for exchange traded funds. Nobody calls it that. Everybody calls it an ETF. So you have
Got
mutual
it.
funds and ETFs. Almost nobody buys mutual funds anymore. Everybody goes into ETFs.
Got it. Got it. So if I have if a person has a bunch of different uh retirement funds, for example,
Okay.
because a lot of people have retirement funds, every 401k, whatever. Would you suggest that they consolidate it or that they just leave it the way it is?
Okay, good, very good question, right? So that happens a lot, especially us Americans, right? Us
Uh-huh.
Americans, we change jobs a lot. So when we always changing jobs, what happens is we'll go to a job, we'll start up a 401k, be there for 2 years, start up another job, be there for 5 years, and then we're always jumping around, right? So
Uh-huh.
what happens is during your entire career, sometimes you can accumulate 5 or 6 different 401ks, even 2 different 401ks. So what happens is that when you are jumping to all these different places when you're inside of 401k. Anybody that has ever had a corporate job and has ever had a 401k or a 403b, if you work for a nonprofit, you know that you're very limited to the investments that you can choose inside those retirement plans. Inside that 401k and inside the 403b, you're very limited to what you can invest. So let's use Angela, for example. Angela, you worked at Microsoft at one time and you're like, man, screw Microsoft, I'm going to Google because Google's giving me better benefits. So now that
Better
401k that
benefits.
you, whatever it is, so now your 401k that you had over at Microsoft, guess what? It's still sitting at Microsoft and you're very limited to what you can invest in. If
Uh-huh.
you take it out of all these various employer 401ks and you merge them into a traditional IRA or a Roth, depending on what you have, if you merge it into an IRA, you have 100% control over what you can do with that account. So you can invest in anything you want.
Okay.
So to answer your question, should you consolidate? Me, I'm a big believer in yes. Consolidate those 401ks into one account because if you consolidate them and take them out of your ex-employer's hands and put them in your
Mm-hmm.
own, you're in control versus your
You're in
employer.
control, and you want to be the one in control of your life. Always be in the
Correct.
driver's seat of your life.
Always
Somebody
be in the
asked a
driver's.
question, by the way. I believe the question was, what's the difference between the universal index fund versus the regular index fund? I can't hear you anymore all of a sudden.
Universal index funds. That's a new one to me. I know I've heard of universal life, or like a life insurance policy, but about index funds.
Her question disappeared from the screen, so I could be remembering
Okay.
it wrong. But Magdi, please type your question in. I can't see it right now. So.
Okay.
Okay, let me ask another question in the meantime. Is it better to buy stocks or mutual funds?
Okay, good, very good question, right? So, like the example that I gave before, right?
Uh-huh.
So, if you know that a specific stock is going to do well, you can always go a stock route, right? So, whenever you invest in a stock, you're investing in literally one company. So, if that one company does well, you do well. If that one company does poorly, then obviously you can lose value in your investment, right? So that's exactly how those investing in stock works. But if you invest in a mutual fund or a ETF, you can basically spread the risk around. Instead of just investing in one company, you can invest in 50 different companies. So what that means is that, let's say you really like McDonald's. I'm using McDonald's because everybody knows what McDonald's, right? So you're like, I really like McDonald's and I'm going to invest in McDonald's. If McDonald's does poorly as a company, then what happens is that your investment can go down. But let's say you invest in a mutual fund that invests in all these different restaurant chains, not just McDonald's, but it can invest in Chipotle, Burger King, Wendy's, all the fast food places. What happens is that now you're spreading your risk around. So if McDonald's does poorly, but Burger King does well, guess what? Your investment can go up. So that's a way. I'm a bigger believer of investing in indexes, so that way you can spread the risk around. But that is not to say not to invest in individual stocks, because if you do your homework right and you know exactly when to jump in on the stock, those will work really well as well. But for the layman, I always say go the index route.
Okay, got it. So Maggie said that she heard that terminology, universal index in the future, but she thinks she may have heard it wrong, or she probably remembers it wrong. But she does have another question. Her next question is, can you tell if a company is going to do well? Is there a way to predict that?
Absolutely. There's ways to predict that, right? So that'll be a conversation probably for another day. But when you actually look into a company's books and records, remember, all these companies are public, right? So if they have stock, meaning that you can go into the stock market and be like, hey, well, McDonald's, I'm gonna use again McDonald's as the example. Like McDonald's is public. So you can actually go into their books, you can see how their earnings per shares are, you can see exactly how they're spending the money, how much debt they have on their books. what kind of income they're generating, what kind of revenue they're generating. You can see which quarters they do really well. They might do very well in the last quarter because it's Christmas time, and a lot of people probably want to save a little bit of money, and they're all going Christmas shopping. So maybe Christmas time is a great time that McDonald's does well. So you can actually go into their books and records and figure out if a stock is overpriced or underpriced. So when I say overpriced or underpriced, you know, like, hey, if a stock is underpriced, that means that you know that the price eventually is going to come up. So it might be a good time to buy. But if it's overpriced, you're like, all right, this stock is a little too expensive right now. I'm going to wait for the price to come down a little bit. So I'm going to give you an example of that, right? An example was Tesla. When Tesla was like $800, everybody's like, "Ah, jump into Tesla. Tesla's great. Tesla's going to be, it's going to do better than Amazon." A lot of guys came out and they did their research and they're like, "Yeah, Amazon, Tesla's a little pricey. Like, we're going to wait for the price to come down." And guess what? Tesla went from $800 down to like $500. So is there a way to check if a stock is overpriced or underpriced? Yes. You do got to do a little research on that, though. And that's a much longer conversation.
But thanks for the insight that you provided. If you were a brand new investor, what question should I ask that I don't even know that I'm supposed to ask?
If you're a brand new investor, and what question should you ask? That's a very good question.
Maggie. Go ahead. Yes.
That's a very good question. So questions that you should ask is a good financial planner will help you figure out what your goals are. A lot of times you don't know what your goal is. So you really have to figure out exactly what the goal of that investment is, right? This has usually been my experience. When I sit down with somebody, I'm like, all right, tell me what your goal is. They're like, oh, I want to make money. Cool. Everybody wants to make money.
Everybody wants to make money.
That's a great goal there. Everybody wants to make money. But the real question becomes, what goal do you want for that specific investment, right? And this is what I mean by that specific investment, right? Like, say you got $50,000 in the bank. You're like, hey, I'm going to use this $50,000 to buy a house in 6 months. I'm just using this as an example. I want to put it somewhere where I can earn as much money as possible. What stock should I put it in? I usually tell people in that scenario, I'm like, don't invest in anything. Keep the money in cash. Forget about trying to earn as much money as possible on that money that you saved for your house, because the goal of that money is to buy a home. The goal of that money is not to invest. The goal of that money is to buy a home. So what you need to do is keep it as liquid as possible. Who cares about how much you're earning on it? You got to keep it in cash.
Now you're going to need it. You're saying in the short term, if you're going to need it, don't put it in the stock.
Correct. Short term, you're going to need it, so do not put it in cash. So now let's say you got that goal out of the way. You're like, no, I already bought my house. This money is for my long term. It's for my retirement. It's just for money for years from now. Cool. So now we know that this money is to invest. Now we got to figure out what the time frame is for that investment. Do you want to invest for 1 year? Do you want to invest for 5 years? Do you want to invest for 10 years? Right? Is your son 1 or your daughter 1? And you're like, hey, I'm going to start saving for college and I'm going to invest. Hey, we know we got over a decade of investments to make. Let's make this a little risky. Now, the reason I say you got to figure out what your goal is because that determines how risky your investment should be. The longer term you have to invest, the riskier you can get. The shorter term you have, the less risky you should be. The more conservative, let's say that. The more conservative you should be as far as your investments.
So how does your age play into this puzzle?
So it's not really your age, it's more about the age of your investment, right? The money that you're going to put away. If you're like, hey, this is for my retirement, I'm 40 and I'm going to retire at 55, or at least that's my goal. Hey, I know I got 15 years that we can start putting some money away. And at that point, you can be a little bit on the riskier end. But if you're 54 or let's say you're 58 and you're like, I'm retiring at 60 and I'm going to start using this money during retirement. We're like, all right, we're 2 years away from retirement. We can't be too risky here. Maybe what we should do is invest maybe just in large cap stocks. And large cap stocks are like, you're talking about the top companies in the country, the companies that are not going to go out of business. Even if we hit a recession and the stock market goes down, those stocks might go down, but you're never going to lose 100% of your money. I can't get, nobody can guarantee that. Apple can go bankrupt tomorrow, but it's very unlikely for Apple to go out of business.
Very unlikely. Okay. Any other question that you think that the brand new investor should ask that they don't even know that they should ask?
As far as what kind of questions, I would say this: ask any questions as many questions as possible. A lot of people get shy, and I tell this again, especially with the people that I'm dealing with, when it comes to not knowing about investments, a lot of times people get shy. They're like, I don't want to ask because I don't want to sound dumb. I'm like, who cares? You have to ask every question you want. Like, if this is your money and you're the client, you have to ask, yo, what does this number mean on my statement? What does this mean? What does that mean? It doesn't matter if you feel like you're a pain in the butt, because you should
Some of
be.
that stuff does look very intimidating too.
And if it looks intimidating, that's okay, right? So if you're dealing with a professional, the professional's supposed to be able to explain that to you, right? So like, for example, you're in the tech business. When I look at, like, I'm watching this show called Mr. Robot, and they're talking about all this tech stuff, and I'm like, I'm so lost. I have to Google everything they're talking about. But this is your world. Like, if I were to bring up technological terms with you, you're like, yeah, I know exactly what that means. But I have to feel comfortable enough to ask you because I don't know. Same thing.
And even I ask questions sometimes because technology is so vast and ever changing. So I ask questions a lot too.
Never listen. I've been doing, like I said before, I've been doing this close to 20 years, and I still get on a weekly call with my team, and we're all feeding off each other. Hey, what did you learn over the week? What did you learn over the weekend? What do you think is happening with the stocks? Let's dig into it. We're always trying to learn as much as possible because everything's changing.
Wow. Here's another question. If a new investor wants to start investing for the short term, is there a stock that you'd recommend or an investment that you'd recommend?
So short term is anything under a year. In my books, in my eyes, even anything under 2 years, that's pretty short term. So I'll tell anybody this: if you may need the money in under a year, don't invest. It doesn't matter where you put the money because you don't know what can happen, right? And I like to use 2008. We're at the age that we remember 2008, right? So,
I remember.
So if you invested January 1st of 2008 in the S&P 500, you're talking about the top 500 companies in this country. By the time December 31st of that same year rolled around, so just 12 months later, your investment was down about 40%. So just to put that in terms, if you invested at $10,000, your $10,000 was worth $6,000 by the end of the year. And this is you investing in the top companies in the country. So yeah, extremely painful, right? Now, again, that's on paper. You don't really realize the loss until you actually sell your investment. So that's why I tell anybody, if it's going to be under a year, man, don't invest. Keep it in the bank. If it's going to be over a year, but it's not exactly going to be 2 years, it's still going to be maybe under a 2-year period, between 1 and 2 years, I will say focus on just large cap stocks. Large cap stocks are, like, again, the companies that are not going to go out of business. Can there be fluctuations? Absolutely. But as long as you can hold on for about 2 years, you should be okay. We've always had, pretty 2-year gaps that we've come out in the black, except, and I'm going to be, just to be fully transparent, except for 2000 to 2002, that 2-year period was red both years. When the towers came down. So
9/11. Yes.
9/11, when that time happened, the stock market was negative for 2 straight years.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Is there a terminology that you use for that period when it's red 2 years in a row?
Well, they say we're in a recession if we're negative 2 quarters in a row. I believe it's 2 quarters or 3 quarters in a row, we're technically in a recession. So, and if it's anything over 4 quarters, now we're in a depression. So 2008, we were negative 4 straight quarters, because it really started October of 2007. So October 2007 all the way till it was February of 2009, we were fully red.
Yeah, I remember that, man. That
was a scary time.
It was eerie.
Yeah.
The streets were eerie. I mean, my business advisor told me to pack it up. Don't, just stay home with the baby.
See, because you don't know.
Bother. I'm glad I didn't listen to him, because he was trying to take away all my hope and all my aspirations. I would not be in business today if I'd listened to him. So I'm glad I didn't listen. But it really was depressing.
And that's another thing. Like, sometimes even the professionals don't know, because they go based off experience, and they'll read all the books in the world, but sometimes things just change. Like, who would have thought that cryptocurrency was going to be such a hot topic, right? So you talk to any financial professional 3 years ago, and they're like cryptocurrency is like a bunch of BS, but now people are making millions of dollars off it.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. It's been a very informative conversation. It's only supposed to be for 30 minutes, so we're going to stop right here.
Okay.
If people have questions, more questions, they can certainly send them in, or they can reach out to you on Instagram. So go ahead and tell the audience who may listen on the replay how they can reach you then.
Instagram is always a good tool because it's so easy. My Instagram handle is Den Mendez, Mendez. So the first 3 letters of my first name and my last.
Thank you. Thank you as well, Magdalene, for your questions. And once again, this is Angela Gibson Angela with Angie Speaks, rather, a derivative of Eve Speaks. And this session is Living Beyond the Splinter. As you know, my platform is to help women primarily navigate the difficulties in their lives, obstacles also known as splinters, so they can continue to heal, aspire, and grow. And these areas that we focus on include the financial, the emotional, the physical, and the relational. And today, the focus is the financial. So again, if you have any further questions, you can certainly send them in. And you can reach us on my page on Facebook, or you can join the group Angie Speaks Stronger Than Splinters. Have a good evening, and we'll talk to you next time in another episode of Living Beyond the Splinter. And Danny, thank you so much.
No, thank you. It was a complete pleasure.